Sparked by what became a hot topic on TikTok, I made a video describing the benefits of anhydrous ammonia. This video was inspired by a guy named Rod, pictured here. I had this video made, but I started doing a little more research before posting it, only to find out the horror story associated with the whole mess. He runs a TikTok page called A Better Way to Farm, trying to get people to sign up for his services. Finding out what his services are is where things became interesting. Rod Livesey, he's a director of sales for a company called Conklin. Conklin has made for years agricultural products, which are nothing more than snake oils. They're micronutrients and other things in a can. I remember back in the 80s, Conklin salesmen would stop by trying to hawk their product, which eventually you just almost started hiding in your building when you saw somebody that sold it pull in the driveway. Very rarely did any of their products actually work. So I started looking up who owns Conklin. Well, ironically, Charles Herbster owns Conklin. He's the president of the company, and he's running for Nebraska governor right now. And if you've been following that race, he's been catching a lot of flack. And now Charles Herbster has Donald Trump endorsing him. They're going to have a Trump rally to help support his gubernatorial race in hopes that the Trump supporters help him get over his allegations. And ironically, this Charles Herbster is from Falls City, Nebraska, which is only about 60 miles from my location. And he also has things in Missouri and looks like a borderline pedophile. The reason I don't have a whole lot of respect for this guy is because of people like this Rob that he hires. And this isn't a personal problem between Rod and I, it's who Rod affiliates with. When he said that he had Southwest Iowa yield results and data, I wondered where he would have got that information. Well, if you roll back a couple of screens to the LinkedIn and see who he associates with, he associates with a guy. Now, I'll spare his name, it's on the screen there. But that guy, his name's Steve, it's his first name, is all I'm going to say. He owed huge amounts of money to people in the community, as well as taking multiple funds from churches and everything else, and eventually leaving the area completely broke, probably over $1 million in debt. Steve actually publicly announced to a Florida newspaper in the late 1990s that he owed over $685,000 and he couldn't pay back any of his debts, nor could he look anybody in the local community in the eye. And after going totally broke, eventually he moved to Texas, just essentially escaping the local area, where he now sells a snake oil product made by Conklin. So him and Rod are great buddies. And ironically, we did farm Steve's ground. He failed at it and owed everybody money. Us was included in that list, probably over $10,000, and that was the early 2000s. And that's how he ended up renting the ground, was because of that. Although the majority of the bill, because we did rent the ground, the majority of the bill still went unpaid. So you can see the type of character that he is. And anybody local that knows this man would tell you the horror stories of this man, as he owed just about everybody in the area money before finally packing up and mysteriously leaving. So this Rod, his affiliated partners are basically scumbags, and that's where he's probably getting some of his data from. So you have a snake oil salesman that's affiliated with a complete fraudulent scumbag snake oil salesman, owned by Charles Herbster, who's selling snake oils and somehow has gotten Donald Trump, another corporate guy, on board to support him. And when I say politics are crooked and the people he associated with are pretty unethical and scumbaggery, yeah, this is exactly what I'm talking about. So if you've used Conklin products in the past and you've had good luck with them, that's great. We've used their products in the past, and I really don't have anything good to say about them at all. Nor do I have much good to say about Steve. And then now knowing this information and seeing the message that Rod and who he affiliates with, yeah, he can also join that list. They're right up there with lawyers, used car salesmen, and basement cockroaches. And yet again, I did make this part of the video after making the video that you're going to see next here. So this was just to connect the dots. Anyway, enjoy.
The reason that anhydrous ammonia is so high priced this year is because it's made out of natural gas. Natural gas is not really traded around the world, it's just sold to the highest bidder. The United States has more natural gas than just about anywhere in the world. Natural gas is the feedstock for anhydrous. It's a byproduct. Anhydrous ammonia. Anhydrous means without water. That's what the definition of that is. The back there in the tank, you see the 1005. All that is a placard warning for non-flammable gas. The chemical composition makeup of this is NH3, which you'll hear a lot of times people refer to anhydrous ammonia as NH3. NH3 is 1 part ammonia, 3 parts hydrogen. And I could talk much more in depth about the chemical makeups, the chemical breakdowns, and molecular structures when anhydrous is applied to soil. However, all that information is easily obtainable online for your own viewing. I wonder how much of the information I gave at the start of this video that people at random, including some but not all farmers, know. We live in a very complex and complicated world, and there's many things that people don't understand. However, people are quick to form opinions or to think they understand something that they really truly don't. Mainly on TikTok, but also on YouTube, there's just a certain group of anti-anhydrous people. Now, if anybody follows TikTok, they'll know what I'm talking about with the Better Way to Farm guy, who was pretty much ridiculed by the farm community on there, the farm talk community on there, and I kind of was the ringleader of that, as I felt his message against anhydrous was misleading. There are multiple types of nitrogen sources. You get nitrogen from lightning, you can get it from snow, you get it from soybeans the year before, other types of legumes. But for corn crops or growing corn, you really need to supplement the nitrogen in the ground. That's how you're going to get the best grass type crop, which is corn, so grass. In our area, and when I use the term our area, you can draw about 100-mile circle around Omaha, Nebraska. There's a large amount of anhydrous ammonia. Almost all the co-ops, AgriLand FSs, anything to do with nutrient, any place that sells ag stuff or has an agronomist probably handles anhydrous ammonia. A few of these places also handle liquid N, which is liquid nitrogen, which is 32% or 28%, also referred to as a UAN. And they handle dry fertilizers. You can get nitrogen as a dry pellet. Now, we are located in southwest Iowa. In our area, our annual rainfall is about 38 inches. However, the last 3 years we've been in a drought. From January 1st to the date of making this video, which is almost the end of April, we have had 4.4 inches of recorded rainfall. And that's on our farm, not that entire 100-mile circle. Additionally, our farm has clay structure soils because prehistorically the glaciers ran out about 50 to 60 miles north of our particular farm, or where we have ground. So soil types vary widely within just a 50-mile circle within that 100-mile circle. And what may work for you may not work for your neighbor. The point of making this video is to be an advocate for anhydrous ammonia, whereas many people that do not use it or understand it deem it as an evil of the world, including Europe has gotten rid of it. But many of these places that have wanted to ban it have the same mentality as Roundup. There's not much proven science behind the negative attributes. And in our farm in particular, liquid nitrogen would actually be worse than anhydrous ammonia. And when I say worse, we lose more of it. Liquid nitrogen, 32 or 28%, is going to be better suited for soils that have quicker take-up due to rainfall. ISU says it requires 0.25 to about a half inch of rainfall to adequately get liquid nitrogen. It's applied with, say, a sprayer into the ground. We have found that to also be true. But in our area, the rain's very unpredicted. You can have 3-inch goose drowning rains or little to no rain. This year we're on little to no rain, or if you have the large goose drowning, which if you have no rain, you'll have a lot of vaporization
of your liquid nitrogen, which means it's just going out into the air and drying out, and there won't be any. Or you can have one of those goose drowners, which we've had liquid in the past, that has literally just flown off. Now, you got to remember, we're in 0 to as much as 12% slope here. I mean, we farm bottoms to mountainsides. And a lot of terraces. If you watch my main channel, you'll know just how many terraces are in our area. Right in here is the biggest terrace of this field, and it tapers down from here. And you can see all the terraces on down. So you got a terrace, and if you don't know how terraces are laid out, you can get a general idea off of my main channel on a how terraces are laid out video. But the point I'm making here in this video is spacing and overlap. With an anhydrous toolbar, especially one that's a 12-knife bar or dual placer, 12-knife planter, we can come around the on row and keep, if you were to use RTK, you can actually plant right on top of your strips. We didn't do that this year, obviously, but you could, and that puts your seedling right on top of its food source. If you're to use a dry spreader, you really need to go out and do boundary lines on all these terraces so you know how far back to spread. Otherwise, you could just be spreading material right into the terrace there. And most dry spreaders are 50 foot on like a Simonson. A bigger one's going to be 100 foot. So if you're going to be looking at a pretty good swath, no matter what the implement is. And an anhydrous toolbar's got section controls. You can shut off different sections, minimize overlap. Whereas that dry spreader, some do have a form of section control, but none of them are ideal, or really none of them really get down to what maybe 6 rows would be, or 3 rows. So your overlap as you get the centers much more. So say you got a place here where the terraces narrow together, like you can see right here, and your overlap's going to start getting pretty heavy where you run a cart around there, especially if you didn't do a boundary line. Maybe you just got a guidance, you're going to start having some pretty hefty overlap. And that's the same for a sprayer boom, unless you got like an exact apply or something like that. We have 7 section controls on ours, which does help, although it's not as good as a planter or an anhydrous toolbar. We're almost down to the row. Now, some anhydrous toolbars I have seen guys run individual row shutoffs on them, which I think is a little bit too much, but I can see the point behind it. But it's just a much easier to control bar in this application. Now, like a liquid colder machine, and I very well could be wrong, as I haven't studied a whole lot on them. I don't know of any that have a whole lot of section controls on them, and there very well may be some section controls for those. A lot of the liquid machines locally are like an 11, so it'd be would fall a 12-row planter, or a 15 would fall a 16-row planter for side dressing. Whereas on the anhydrous bars, you kind of get a menagerie of in-betweens and evens and odds, but we personally go with on-row machine. Am I against 32%? Absolutely not. Am I against dry fertilizer? Absolutely not. I do have lots of experience for years having had used 32% as well as dry on our own farm. When using dry, we now have urea, which is not very long lasting. They do have some new products out there now that encapsulate it, that supposedly make it last longer from vaporization. But back when we used dry, we had ammonium nitrate, which is almost impossible to get anymore because of things like Timothy McVeigh when he blew up the Oklahoma City building. It's explosive, it's unstable, and they've even had some issues with storage and containing of it. It's a great product. You can lay it on the surface of the ground, it'll last for forever. It just never vaporizes. We did have good results with that, minus the overlap, but you just can't get it. Urea, the last time we spread that was here a couple years ago on wheat. We spread it in the spring, the wheat was already up, and we did not get a rain. I think, just educated guess, by pellet size, we probably only got about 30% of the product. Liquid nitrogen, we've used multiple times in the past. We would rent toolbars from the co-op and anhydrous on some years, or if a year fell behind, we would use Liquid M. And I like Liquid M for like a second pass in the summer, although there are some people who use Drive. Again, it just really depends when you're going to get rainfall, although June is typically our wettest month of the year here in our area, so you're going to have more predictable rainfalls at that time. So for side dressing, it is an option. Now, we've used Liquid N pre-planting, and we've used Liquid N right after the planter went through, meaning we went out and planted like the next day. We had the co-ops come in, and we had the co-ops come in because you're putting down like 50 to 75 gallons an acre, and at that time our sprayer, unless you wanted to drive a half a mile per hour, would not handle that kind of gallons. And that is a big factor when handling liquid nitrogen, is just the sheer amount of volume that you have to carry to the field. It's a very sticky, very corrosive product. We did apply some in the past with our own tractors and stuff, and that was back in the 80s when we had a lot of corrosion on sprayer booms and around tractor cabs and things like that. Just a nasty product, which I can't say anhydrous really has much for anything corrosive. I mean, toolbars last a long time. And when we got rain, the yields were pretty good with Liquid N, and when we didn't get rain, it was a total fail. If you're running a dual placement machine like we have right here in this video, that's another advantage to anhydrous. You can run your N, your P, your K, you put a little trace in there. You can monitor all three different products at the exact same time, as well as getting that dry fertilizer on row, which again, if you want to use RTK, and you're doing it all in one application at a pretty good rate of speed. I don't think that there's any other forms or abilities to do all three things that fast at one time in proper placements. If you're dry broadcasting on the surface, it will take longer to get down into the earth. But again, there's multiple factors to consider, such as even eastern Iowa or northern Iowa is going to be much, much different than what I'm talking about here, because of the soil types as well as the annual rainfall. Anything after middle Iowa, which would be divided by I-35, typically has more rainfall. As you get towards Illinois, rainfall increases to 50 inches a year, which then at that point you have a much better chance of using Liquid N and getting it rained in. Again, we are in terraces. That's an issue when applying Liquid N to keep the burn from going up on the terrace, especially if you're going to use your herbicide with your Liquid N. Although I will say it does kill the weeds. It really fries the weeds. The last field that we had ran Liquid N on was a rental farm. The owner did not want anhydrous applied because he felt it killed earthworms and microbial life, and that's one of the biggest arguments and false arguments that there is about anhydrous, is that it kills earthworms or microbes. And you can simply Google that by going to multiple universities and seeing their research data on that particular subject, as well as an open door invitation to our own farm, which is where I took these pictures. I went out at random, just dug into the field with a nothing more than about 1.5 inch to 2 inch long blade pocket knife, and was able to find two earthworms, in the size of my hand hole. So if you were to shove a shovel in the ground and pull it up, you would probably be looking at about 10 earthworms per shovelful, and then again, that's at random. And generally speaking, yes, we do no-till on our farm. That's just because of our highly erodible ground and topography. The organic material that was in that ground where I dug at random was quite amazing, very good. A lot of breakdown occurring, which is what their worms feed upon. But again, if you do not believe me about anhydrous not killing earthworms, you're more than welcome to come to our farm as well as do your own on-farm trials. And I think that just about anybody that says otherwise would be quite shocked by the results. The next myth of anhydrous was compaction that we heard in a series of videos on TikTok. Well, anhydrous toolbars in the spring, I happen to agree with. That's a lot of weight pounding around out there, and for that fact, just about anything pounding around out there, especially if it's a little damp in the spring, is probably not good. I do like to put the anhydrous on in the fall. which is an advantage of anhydrous only, is the fact that you can spring or fall apply it. And it does not leach out in the fall, at least not in our area. It allows the ground to recover. It allows the moisture to soak in around it, and you end up with a beautiful seed bed come next spring. Next, let's talk about safety. Liquid nitrogen can be dangerous. Anhydrous can be dangerous. Driving your car can be dangerous. Just about anything that humans do in this world can be dangerous. And there's a lot of people that like to use fear tactics, such as showing pictures of anhydrous tanks flipped or lines ripped off. But there's all sorts of safety precautions. There's all sorts of factors to consider. And a lot of those fear videos are nothing more than just dipshits who didn't do things right. They didn't check the wheel bearings before they went down the road. They didn't make sure the tires were pumped up. They didn't check to see if their drawbar wasn't worn completely in half, or use a clip to hold their hitch pin in. I personally took part in a large 32% cleanup, and you can see that video on the main channel. It was an accident that had happened, and it got into the groundwater of a town. It also turned the soil into a jello-like substance. For multi-years using anhydrous, we've never really had an incident. I can't say I haven't had a couple speckles on my hand because I got in a big hurry, but you can also have salt burns from 32%. Yes, anhydrous is dangerous. Yes, other things are dangerous, but if people are willingly aware of the danger and actually take efforts to mitigate possibilities, negative possibilities such as accidents, then there really isn't much fear to worry about it. And the last argument that they had on TikTok was Liquid N is cheaper. Well, he had called, apparently, some supplier for current prices. What he fatally forgets is that you could not apply that in the end, that Liquid N in the fall, and have it carry over to spring. Last fall, anhydrous was $730 a ton local. Now it's about $1,500 a ton here local. It's still cheaper at the $1,500 a ton than the current price. Now this is at our local supplier, but it's still cheaper than the liquid 32%, but not a whole lot. But if you compare it to having had putting it on last fall versus buying Liquid N, which had to be used in the spring, you're talking major savings. So if we're looking for the cheapest form of nitrogen for our ground and for what our particular farm has had the most consistent yield results from without any failures ever, and we've already debunked the killing off earthworms theories, anhydrous is a good product. As to why I'm advocating it, I'm trying to make people aware that there's nothing to be scared about, and it doesn't take a lot of hate to make things go away. It's already happened in Europe, and when you start to cultivate a mentality amongst the people, even though it's based on misinformation, things end up getting taken from you. We have a local hate group that's trying to go after wind turbines, and they always say the squeaky wheel gets greased. Well, it doesn't take 10 people out of a 10,000, but they scream the loudest and sometimes get their way. Then it does rest of those people that did want the product or the item end up getting screwed or lose it, because even though they didn't agree, they sat there idly by, thinking that that small minority group would not change things, when in fact they were able to. So I feel anhydrous could be falling to that at some point, as well as certain chemicals on our farm, and it's based off of misinformation. And if you did wave that magic wand and just randomly got rid of all anhydrous overnight, there would be a huge need for liquid machines as well as ways of handling it and transporting it. There would also be major shortages of the product, and it would no longer be $600 a ton, because markets react to supply and demand, and overnight changes, they oftentimes result in major market fluctuations. So choose what works best for your farm, and anybody who's thinking that they can run our farm better than we can, we've already done the on-farm trial. I invite you to come out to an open house and say otherwise, and that's so pending that you're willing to pick up the tab once your idea does not work. And yes, it was brought up in the comments about using a knife to put the liquid in the ground. That still requires some rainfall, not as much. That is an advantage, yes. And we have not done it on our farm, but I had a very, very close friend who did it on a farm right next to ours, and I was there every step of the way. That's because that's what his landlord wanted, and he also had some negative responses versus what he was farming right next to that farm, which was their own, which was anhydrous, was better yields. So if you want to consider the cheapest fertilizer with the best return and the best yields for our area, you're probably going to be sticking with anhydrous. And if you're one of those people that's listening to this video that's used anhydrous and agrees with me, you might want to be prepared to fight for your product coming forward, because there's a lot of misinformation out there trying to remove it. As far as what anhydrous has to do with wind turbines, nothing directly, but it is a small minority group that ultimately can affect the decisions that are made on your property, when those decisions that are made by you ultimately affect no one else. In other words, mind your own damn business and do what's right for your own farm. There are certain farmers in the area that I don't think do things the way I would do them, and I sometimes will criticize them to a certain degree, or just my thought process, my head criticizes them. The ones that are successful seems like everybody wants to follow, and the ones that fail, you sometimes can see why. But by no means do I ever get in my vehicle, go to their house, and specifically yell at them about how exactly they need to farm their farm. That's their business. Leave everybody the hell alone. There are other things to consider on the anhydrous versus liquid debate, such as salt deposits. Some will argue that anhydrous removes the calcium from soil. That is true, but it's true to any form of nitrogen. And you can Google that from different university studies, and it's quite arguable as to which form of nitrogen does it the fastest. And none of these results on any of these studies are any too conclusive. As far as the guy on TikTok, I openly extended the offer to put his money where his mouth was. I'm not opposed to getting a different machine and going to liquid in, but I want to make sure that the results are going to work. And what I can tell you from what we have tried with it, and tried quite a few times, that the results were not as good, and we could not save as much money. Now, if he can prove that to me, and he would like to come out here and do a plot, I am all for that. That's been offered to him, which he either ghosted to or refused to acknowledge or even respond to. He does not want to, quote, put his money where his mouth is. And that's very typical of agronomists. That's very typical of seed salesmen. They want your money. They want you to sign up for what they're going to suggest, but they don't want to take the financial responsibility if such advice is poor. So what I do is try to just get as much free advice as possible, and go to one that you may trust. Again, not generally not paying for it, but I try to get things that work for us. And so far, I've actually been quite successful with that. And if you spend enough time looking on the internet, you can form your own opinions, and it never hurts to do your own on-farm trials. As far as that guy, in my opinion, he lost the argument, but I don't think there was ever really a winner or a loser, but he lost the argument, in my opinion, because he refuses to come out and actually do an on-farm trial. I don't know why he would be scared to do that unless he has had data that says otherwise. So And yes, I even upped the ante to him. I'll sign a 20-year contract to do nothing but liquid in if you win. The yield results and everything else. Multi-championship corn growers have also used anhydrous, and they will continue to use anhydrous. Therefore, I don't think a lot of the larger producers, but then again, yield doesn't always equal profit. And yes, that guy is the same as a seed salesman. Again, he will not put his money where his mouth is. A good way I've figured out to get rid of seed salesmen is to tell them, I'll put out 40 acres up here, I'll run the numbers that I'm going to run that I've normally bought, and you bring in some of your numbers, we'll do a plot. I control the fertilizer, and I control the ground with the spraying and chemicals. It's going to be the same clear across, and it'll be right in one field, and we'll publish the results right on my YouTube channel, my main YouTube channel. And every single one of those seed sales companies has completely ghosted, not taken the opportunity, and honestly never even came back to the property. Ironically, it's ironic to me, I should say, how they want your money but don't want to stand behind what they're selling. Does that really value what they're selling, and they wholeheartedly believe in it, or do they just wholeheartedly believe in the paycheck? That's a topic for a different debate. And if you can use anhydrous on your ground, that's great. If you want to use liquid in, that's also great. You do what's right for your farm and your conditions and your budget. Thanks for watching.